The wind cut through Black Hollow like a razor blade dipped in ice water. Eleanor Vale stood in the town square with 9 other women, all of them shivering in dresses too thin for January in the Colorado mountains. They'd traveled 3 weeks by train and wagon to reach this miserable collection of wooden buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a rotting ship. Mail-order brides, every one of them. Purchased sight unseen by men desperate enough to send money east for a wife. Eleanor kept her eyes down, studying the frozen mud beneath her boots. She knew what was coming. She'd known since Philadelphia, when the other women started whispering behind their hands, shooting glances at her broad shoulders and thick waist. "Line up straight," barked Mrs. Hutchins, the wagon mistress who'd shepherded them west like cattle. "Let these gentlemen get a proper look at what they paid for." Eleanor wanted to disappear, just melt into the snow and vanish. The men of Black Hollow shuffled forward, miners with dirt under their fingernails, ranchers smelling of horse sweat and tobacco, traders in slightly better coats but with the same hungry eyes. They walked down the line slowly, inspecting. One man lifted a blonde girl's chin to examine her teeth like she was livestock. Another asked a petite brunette to turn in a circle. Eleanor's stomach twisted into knots. "That one," said a miner, pointing at the blonde. "She'll do fine." The girl practically ran to him, relief washing over her face. Better a rough miner than being left behind in this frozen nightmare. One by one, the women were chosen. The brunette who could turn in circles. A redhead who smiled sweetly despite her obvious terror. A pale girl from Boston who looked like she might faint but got claimed anyway by a rancher who said he needed someone to cook. Eleanor watched them go, each selection narrowing her chances like a noose tightening around her neck. When only 3 women remained, Mrs. Hutchins cleared her throat. "Gentlemen, these ladies also paid their passage west in good faith. Surely there are more men in need of wives." A trader in a beaver-skin coat walked past Eleanor without even slowing down. He chose the girl to her left, a quiet seamstress from New York. 2 women left. Eleanor and a rail-thin girl named Prudence who couldn't stop crying. A rancher took Prudence, probably figuring tears were easier to manage than whatever he saw when he looked at Eleanor. Then there was only one. Eleanor stood alone in the center of Black Hollow while 40 men stared at her like she was a bad cut of meat at the butcher's shop. "Well," Mrs. Hutchins said, her voice sharp with irritation, "someone must need a wife capable of hard work. Look at those arms. She's strong as an ox." The comparison landed like a slap. Several men snickered. One laughed outright. "I didn't pay good money for an ox," someone called from the back. "I paid for a wife." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Eleanor felt heat rising in her face despite the cold. This was worse than Philadelphia, worse than the orphanage where she'd grown up being told she was too big, too plain, too much of everything except what men wanted. "She'd eat a man out of house and home," another voice said. "Can she even fit through a doorway?" "I've seen prettier mules." The laughter grew louder, meaner. Men who minutes ago had been desperate for any woman now competed to see who could deliver the cruelest insult. Mrs. Hutchins held up her hand. "Gentlemen, please. Miss Vale is a respectable woman who—" "Then she can go back east," the beaver-coat trader interrupted. "We don't need her kind here." "Her kind?" Eleanor's voice came out before she could stop it. "What kind is that exactly?" The trader's eyes went cold. "The kind that ain't fit for frontier life. Look at you. First hard winter would kill you, and we'd be stuck burying your oversized corpse in frozen ground." Something inside Eleanor cracked. She'd spent 26 years swallowing insults, keeping quiet, making herself smaller even though her body refused to cooperate. She'd endured the orphanage matrons who said no man would want her, the Philadelphia ladies who hired her to sew their dresses but wouldn't let her enter through the front door, the wagon mistress who charged her double fare because she took up more than her share of space. She'd crossed an entire continent believing that somewhere, somehow, things would be different. Instead, she'd found the same cruelty wearing different hats. "I walked here from the train depot," Eleanor said, her voice steady now. 23 miles in 3 days through snow up to my knees. I didn't ask for help. I didn't complain. I carried my own bags and kept pace with your wagons, so you tell me who ain't fit for frontier life." Silence fell over the square. The trader's face flushed red. You got a smart mouth for someone begging for a husband. I ain't begging for nothing, Eleanor shot back. Especially not from men who can't tell the difference between strong and broken. Why you— Enough, Mrs. Hutchins snapped. She turned to Eleanor with something that might have been pity in her eyes. Miss Vale, perhaps it would be best if you returned east on the next— No. I beg your pardon? I said no. Eleanor's hands were shaking, but she kept them balled into fists at her sides. I paid my fare same as everyone else. I signed the contract. I came here in good faith, and I ain't leaving just because these men got more opinions than sense. Watch your mouth, woman, the traitor growled. Or what? Eleanor took a step forward. You'll mock me some more? Already done. You'll refuse to marry me? Already done. You'll make me feel like I ain't worth the dirt on your boots? Been feeling that way since I was old enough to know what a mirror was. She swept her gaze across the crowd, meeting every pair of eyes that would hold her stare. I'm strong. I can sew, cook, clean, and work harder than most men I've met. I don't complain, I don't cry, and I sure as hell don't quit. But if none of that matters because I don't look like some delicate flower you can press in a book, then fine. You ain't worth my time either. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone started clapping slowly, mockingly. The laughter returned, harsher than before. Hear that, boys? The traitor said. We ain't worth her time. Big talk from the leftover bride. Maybe she can marry herself. Eleanor felt tears threatening, hot and humiliating behind her eyes. She refused to let them fall. She'd given these bastards enough satisfaction. Mrs. Hutchins touched her arm. Miss Vale, please, let's discuss your options somewhere warm. The thunder of hoofbeats cut through the air. Every head in the square turned toward the sound. 3 riders emerged from the tree line at the edge of town, their horses dark shapes against the white snow. Even from a distance, Eleanor could tell something was different about these men. They sat their horses differently, moved differently. The laughter died. Christ, someone whispered. That's Boone. The name rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Boone. Eleanor had heard the name during the journey west. The other brides had whispered it like a ghost story. A mountain man who lived somewhere in the high peaks, so far from civilization that some folks doubted he was real. A giant who could kill a grizzly with his bare hands. A savage who preferred the company of wolves to people. The riders drew closer. 2 of them were ordinary enough, grizzled trappers in heavy furs and wool. But the third, Eleanor had never seen a man that size. He sat a massive roan horse that looked small beneath him, his shoulders so broad they blocked out the sky behind him. A heavy coat of bear fur draped over his frame, and beneath it she caught glimpses of buckskin and leather. His face was half hidden by a thick beard the color of old iron, but his eyes were visible, pale, cold, and sharp as broken ice. Scars cut through the beard on one side, disappearing into his collar. He looked like something carved from the mountain itself. The 3 riders stopped at the edge of the square. The trappers dismounted, but Boone stayed in the saddle, surveying the scene with those winter sky eyes. Garrick, Mrs. Hutchins said, and Eleanor was startled to hear actual warmth in her voice. We weren't expecting you. Heard there were brides. His voice was deep, rough, like rocks grinding together in an avalanche. Figured I'd see if the rumors were true. You're too late, the traitor said quickly. They've all been spoken for. Boone's gaze swept across the square, touching briefly on each of the newly married couples. Then it landed on Eleanor. She felt pinned by those eyes, like a rabbit caught in torchlight. Seems like you missed one, Boone said. That one ain't the traitor started. I'll take her. Time stopped. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Surely she'd misheard. Surely this mountain giant hadn't just claimed her in front of everyone who'd spent the last hour explaining why she was worthless. Now wait just a minute, the traitor sputtered. You can't just ride in here and— Can't I? Boone finally dismounted, his boots hitting the frozen ground with a sound like thunder. Standing, he was even more massive than Eleanor had thought. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, maybe more, built like an oak tree. He walked toward her. Every instinct screamed at Eleanor to run, but her legs wouldn't move. This man looked like he could snap her spine with one hand. He looked like the kind of monster mothers warned their daughters about. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. You strong? He asked. Eleanor's mouth was dry as sand. Yes. You know how to work? Yes. You afraid of dying? The question caught her off guard. What? The mountains kill weak people, Boone said flatly. Weather, animals, accidents, loneliness. Takes a certain kind of stubborn to survive up there. You got that kind of stubborn? Eleanor thought about the orphanage, the years of mockery and rejection, the 3-week journey west that had been one humiliation after another, the last hour standing in this frozen square while men debated her worth like she was furniture. Yeah, she said, I got it. Something flickered in those cold eyes. Not quite a smile, but close. Good. He turned to Mrs. Hutchins. What's the cost? Garrick, are you certain? Miss Vale is a fine woman, but mountain life, how much? Mrs. Hutchins sighed. $200, same as the others paid. Boone reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily. He counted out gold coins without hesitation, dropping them into Mrs. Hutchins's hand. This ain't right, the trader protested. We should have first choice. We're the ones who... You had your choice. Boone's voice went flat and dangerous. You chose to laugh like jackals. Now you get to watch someone else make a better decision. He looked back at Eleanor. You got belongings? She nodded mutely. Get them. We're leaving before the weather turns. Eleanor's bag sat in the snow where she'd dropped it earlier. She picked it up with numb fingers, barely believing this was happening. An hour ago, she'd been the joke of Black Hollow. Now she was leaving with a man who looked like he could tear the town apart with his bare hands. She didn't know if this was rescue or a different kind of nightmare. Boone's 2 companions had already started leading the horses toward the edge of town. Boone gestured for Eleanor to follow, then fell into step beside her. Behind them, the town square buzzed with whispers. He'll kill her first hard freeze. Poor fool doesn't know what she's in for. Boone ain't had a woman up there in years. This'll end badly. Eleanor kept walking. Let them whisper. Let them predict her death. She'd survived worse than their low expectations. At the tree line, Boone stopped beside a sturdy dun mare. You ride? Not well, Eleanor admitted. You'll learn. He helped her onto the horse with surprising gentleness, his hand steadying her until she found her balance in the saddle. Then he mounted his own horse and turned it toward the mountains. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding with fear and something else she couldn't quite name. Behind her, Black Hollow disappeared into the snowy distance. Ahead, the peaks rose like jagged teeth against the gray sky. She'd traded one unknown for another, but at least this unknown had chosen her when everyone else had turned away. They rode for hours in silence. The 2 trappers, Boone's companions, led the way, their horses picking carefully through snow that got deeper the higher they climbed. Boone rode behind Eleanor, close enough that she felt watched, but not threatened. The forest pressed in on both sides, pine trees heavy with snow that occasionally dumped in soft avalanches when the wind blew. Eleanor's hands went numb inside her thin gloves. Her dress was completely wrong for this kind of travel, the fabric soaking up moisture until it clung to her legs like ice. She didn't complain. When the mare stumbled on hidden ice, Eleanor grabbed the saddle horn and held on, refusing to cry out even though her heart leaped into her throat. Easy, Boone's voice came from behind her. Let her find her footing. She knows this trail better than you do. Eleanor loosened her grip slightly. The mare recovered, shaking her mane. That's it, Boone said. Trust the horse. It was the first thing he'd said since they left Black Hollow. The trail grew steeper. Eleanor's thighs burned from gripping the saddle, muscles screaming from unfamiliar use. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold, mixing with melted snow. Just when she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, the trappers called a halt. We camp here, one of them said. Storm's coming in fast. Eleanor looked up at the sky. It had darkened to the color of old bruises, and the wind carried the smell of snow. She slid off the mare with all the grace of a sack of potatoes, her legs nearly giving out when her feet hit the ground. Pain shot through her knees and hips. Walk it off, Boone said, dismounting smoothly despite his size. Stand still and you'll seize up. Eleanor forced herself to move, limping in small circles while the men set up camp with practiced efficiency. They worked without speaking, each knowing exactly what needed to be done. Within 20 minutes, they had a fire going in a sheltered spot between two massive boulders, horses secured, and a crude shelter rigged from oiled canvas. Eleanor tried to help, but everything she reached for, one of the trappers was already handling. "Sit," Boone finally said. "You'll just slow us down." It should have stung, but his tone was matter-of-fact rather than cruel. He wasn't mocking her incompetence, just stating reality. Eleanor sat on a fallen log near the fire, grateful for the warmth. Her dress was soaked through, steaming slightly in the heat. One of the trappers handed her a tin cup of something that smelled like pine needles and dirt. "Drink it. Keeps you warm from the inside." She sipped carefully. It tasted worse than it smelled, but heat bloomed in her chest. "I'm Dutch," the trapper said. He was older, maybe 50, with a face like worn leather and kind eyes. "That ugly bastard over there is Pine." Pine, younger and lean as a willow branch, raised a middle finger without looking up from the rabbit he was skinning. "Friendly bunch," Eleanor muttered. Dutch grinned. "You'll get used to it. Mountains don't leave much room for pleasantries." Boone crouched beside the fire, feeding it carefully selected pieces of wood. His hands were huge, but moved with surprising precision. "We'll reach the lodge tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds," he said. "It won't hold, so probably the day after." "The lodge?" Eleanor asked. "Where I live. And where exactly is that?" "High enough that most folks think it don't exist." He glanced at her. "That a problem?" "I don't know yet." The corner of his mouth might have twitched, hard to tell through the beard. Pine finished with the rabbit and set it over the fire on a makeshift spit. The smell of cooking meat made Eleanor's stomach growl audibly. "When'd you last eat?" Boone asked. "Yesterday morning." "Why?" "Mrs. Hutchins said we needed to look our best for the choosing. Said full bellies made women look bloated." Dutch spat into the snow. "That woman's got more rules than sense." "Most people do," Boone said. They ate in silence as the first snow began to fall. Big, lazy flakes that drifted down like ash. The rabbit was tough and gamey, but Eleanor tore into it like it was a feast. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food appeared. Pine watched her eat with something like approval. "You don't pick at your food like a bird." "Never saw the point," Eleanor said between bites. "Good. Women who don't eat properly don't last long up here." After the meal, Dutch and Pine rolled themselves in blankets near the fire and were asleep within minutes. Boone remained awake, feeding the fire, checking the horses, scanning the dark forest beyond their small circle of light. Eleanor huddled in the blanket someone had tossed her, exhausted but too wound up to sleep. "You got questions," Boone said without looking at her. "Ask them." "Why me?" "You were the only one left." "That ain't an answer." He was quiet for a long moment. "The other women were pretty, delicate, built for parlors and tea parties." He poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Those women don't survive mountains. They break, or they run, or they die trying to be something they ain't built for. And I'm built for mountains." "You're built for surviving." He finally looked at her. "I watched you in that square. Every man there kicked you while you were down, and you didn't cry, didn't beg. You stood there and took it, then told them all to go to hell." "I didn't actually say that." "Didn't have to. It was written all over your face." He added another piece of wood to the fire. "That kind of stubborn is worth more than a pretty smile up here." Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter. "You don't know me. I could be weak. Could be useless." "Could be," Boone agreed. "But I don't think so." "Why not?" "Because weak people don't survive being unwanted their whole lives. They give up, or they bend until they break. You're still standing, still fighting. That tells me everything I need to know." The words hit Eleanor harder than any insult she'd endured in Black Hollow. This stranger, this mountain giant who'd known her for less than a day, saw something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself years ago. "I'll try," she said quietly. "To be what you need. To learn the mountains and not slow you down and—" "Stop." She fell silent. "I don't need you to be anything except alive," Boone said. "You do that. Stay breathing, don't quit, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." Snow fell harder now, muffling the world in white silence. "Get some sleep," Boone said. "Tomorrow's going to be rough." Eleanor lay down near the fire, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Through heavy eyelids, she watched Boone keeping watch, a dark shape against the darker forest. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something other than fear or shame. She felt chosen, not because she was pretty or delicate or any of the things she'd been told mattered, but because she was strong enough to survive. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The storm hit 2 hours before dawn. Eleanor woke to wind screaming through the trees like something alive and furious. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see Dutch and Pine's shapes on the other side of the fire, which had dwindled to glowing embers fighting against the onslaught. "Stay down," Boone's voice cut through the wind. He was moving around the camp, securing things that were trying to blow away. "Don't try to help. You'll get lost 3 feet from the fire." Eleanor pulled the blanket over her head and curled into herself, shivering violently. The cold was different up here, sharper, meaner, like it had teeth. It found every gap in her clothing, every exposed inch of skin. She heard Boone working steadily, his boots crunching through snow that was already several inches deeper than when she'd fallen asleep. The canvas shelter snapped and cracked in the wind like gunshots. "How long will this last?" she called out. "Long as it wants to," not reassuring. The wind shifted, driving snow directly into Eleanor's face. She gasped, choking on ice and air so cold it burned her lungs. For a terrifying moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't do anything except panic. Strong hands grabbed her shoulders. "Slow," Boone said, his face suddenly close to hers. "Breathe slow, through your nose if you can." Eleanor forced herself to calm down, to pull air in through her nostrils instead of her mouth. It helped. Not much, but enough. "Better?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. Boone wrapped another blanket around her, tucking it tight. "This is nothing. Wait until you see a real storm." "This isn't real." "This is spring weather having a tantrum." He sat down beside her, blocking some of the wind with his bulk. "Real storms last 3 days and bury cabins up to the roofline. You're just full of comfort, aren't you?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You want comfort, you should have stayed east." They sat in silence while the storm raged. Eleanor's teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. She'd never been this cold in her life, never imagined cold like this existed. "Here." Boone shifted, opening his heavy fur coat. "Get in." Eleanor hesitated. "Your pride ain't worth freezing to death," he said flatly. "Get in or don't, but I ain't offering twice." She swallowed her embarrassment and scooted closer, letting him wrap the coat around both of them. The heat radiating from his body was immediate and overwhelming. She hadn't realized how cold she'd gotten until warmth hit her like a physical force. "Better?" he asked. Much." She was pressed against his side, could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He smelled like smoke and pine, and something wild she couldn't identify. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We still got to make it to the lodge alive." The storm blew itself out around midday, leaving behind a world transformed. Everything was white. The trees, the ground, the boulders that had sheltered them. The sun broke through clouds and turned the landscape into something painfully bright. Dutch emerged from his blankets like a bear from hibernation, shaking snow off himself. "Hell of a welcome for the new bride." "She's still breathing," Pine observed, kicking snow off his boots. "That's more than some manage." They broke camp efficiently, packing everything onto the horses who stood patient and snow-covered. Eleanor tried to help, but her fingers were too numb and clumsy. She dropped a bedroll twice before Boone took it from her without comment. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so." Thinking ain't good enough, yes or no? Eleanor flexed her stiff legs, testing. Everything hurt, but nothing felt broken or torn. "Yes." "Then mount up. We're burning daylight." The trail was harder now, buried under fresh snow that hid rocks and roots and holes that could break a horse's leg. The animals moved carefully, testing each step. Eleanor gripped the saddle horn so hard her knuckles went white. They climbed higher. The air thinned, making Eleanor's lungs work harder for each breath. Her head started to pound, a dull ache behind her eyes that grew worse with every hour. Sweat froze on her face despite the cold. "How much farther?" she called to Boone. "Far enough that asking won't make it closer." Dutch dropped back to ride beside her. "Don't mind him. He gets surlier the closer we get to home. Ain't used to bringing people there." "How long have you known him?" 10 years, give or take. Found him half dead from a grizzly attack. Nursed him back. Been trading with him ever since." Eleanor glanced at Boone's broad back ahead of them. What happened to his face? Those scars? Same grizzly that almost killed him. Animal got in 3 good swipes before Garrick put a knife in its brain. Dutch shook his head. Most men would have died from blood loss alone. Garrick walked 15 miles to find help. Why does he live up here alone? Dutch was quiet for a moment. That ain't my story to tell. You want to know? You ask him yourself. But my advice? Give it time. Garrick don't trust easy, and he sure as hell don't talk about the past unless he's got reason to. They stopped twice more that day to rest the horses and eat hard jerky that tasted like salted leather. Eleanor's body had moved past pain into a kind of numb exhaustion, where everything hurt equally, so nothing hurt specifically. She was fairly certain she was dying. Still breathing? Boone asked during the second stop. Unfortunately. Good. Dead weight's harder to carry. Your sympathy is overwhelming, Pine snorted. She's got spirit. I like her. Don't get attached, Boone said. First month kills most people who ain't born to it. Cheerful bastard, ain't he? Eleanor muttered. You got no idea, Dutch agreed. The sun was setting when they finally crested a ridge, and Boone pulled his horse to a stop. Eleanor drew up beside him, expecting another campsite. Instead, she saw the lodge. It sat on a natural shelf of rock overlooking a valley that dropped away into darkness. Massive timber walls rose 2 stories high, crowned with a steep roof designed to shed snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. Windows glowed with firelight. Someone had gone ahead to prepare for their arrival. The building looked like it had grown out of the mountain itself, solid and permanent and completely isolated. The nearest neighbor was probably 50 miles away. That's home, Boone said simply. Eleanor stared. She'd expected a cabin, rough, small, barely enough to keep the weather out. This was a fortress, a statement carved into the wilderness that said someone had claimed this land and intended to keep it. You built that? She asked. Most of it. Had help with the roof. He urged his horse forward. Come on, before dark settles in. They descended a narrow trail that switched back and forth down the mountainside. Eleanor's mare picked her way carefully, never missing a step despite the fading light. By the time they reached the lodge, full darkness had fallen and stars were emerging overhead in numbers Eleanor had never seen. A man emerged from the lodge carrying a lantern, tall, dark-skinned, wearing spectacles that caught the light. Thought you might show tonight, he said. Storm slow you down? Some, Boone dismounted. Eleanor, this is Marcus. He manages the lower trap lines and keeps the lodge from falling apart when I'm gone. Marcus raised the lantern to study Eleanor. His eyes were intelligent, assessing. You're the bride from Black Hollow. Word travels fast, Eleanor said. Dutch sent a runner ahead yesterday. He offered his hand to help her dismount. Welcome to Frost Ridge. I hope you're prepared for disappointment. Garrick's not nearly as exciting as the stories make him sound. I'll keep my expectations low, Eleanor said, accepting his help. Her legs nearly buckled when she hit the ground. Marcus steadied her. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Define proper. More than jerky and melted snow. Then I honestly can't remember. Come on. He guided her toward the lodge. Let these fools handle the horses. You need food and warmth before you keel over. The interior of the lodge hit Eleanor like a wall of heat and light. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling cheerfully. The main room was larger than any parlor she'd seen in Philadelphia. Timber floors, exposed beams overhead, furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books, maps, and what looked like medical supplies. A kitchen occupied one corner, cast iron stove radiating heat. Marcus guided her to a chair near the fireplace and disappeared, returning moments later with a bowl of something that steamed and smelled like heaven. Venison stew, he said. Been simmering since this morning. Eat slow or you'll make yourself sick. Eleanor tried to heed his warning, but hunger overrode caution. The stew was rich and thick, full of meat and vegetables that actually had flavor. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something this good. Slow down, Marcus repeated, amused. It's not going anywhere. Sorry. Eleanor forced herself to take smaller bites. This is really good. Cooking's one of the few civilized skills that translates to wilderness living. He settled into a chair across from her. I was a physician in Chicago before I came west. Thought I'd find adventure. Found mostly frostbite and gunshot wounds, but the scenery's better. You're a doctor? Was. Still am, technically, though my patients tend to be trappers and miners rather than society ladies. The door opened and Boone entered, followed by Dutch and Pine. They brought cold air and snow with them, stomping their boots on the threshold. Everything secure? Marcus asked. For now, Boone said. He crossed to the fireplace, warming his hands. His eyes found Eleanor. You eaten? She held up the bowl as evidence. Good. Marcus, show her where she'll sleep. Tomorrow, we start figuring out if she can actually survive up here. Marcus stood. This way. He led Eleanor up a staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dim, lit by a single lantern. 4 doors led off it, 3 closed, 1 open. That's your room, Marcus said, pointing to the open door. Garrick's is at the end of the hall. Mine and the spare are the other 2. There's a washroom downstairs, though the water's cold this time of year unless you heat it first. Eleanor stepped into her room. It was simple. A bed with a thick quilt, a small dresser, a chair by the window. But it was clean and private, which was more than she'd had at the orphanage or during the journey west. Thank you, she said. Marcus lingered in the doorway. Can I give you some advice? Please. Don't try to prove yourself right away. Garrick brought you here because he saw something in you, but the mountains don't care about potential. They only care about results. He adjusted his spectacles. Learn what he teaches you. Ask questions. Be honest when you don't know something. Pride kills people up here faster than cold or hunger. I'll remember that. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. And Eleanor? I'm glad you're here. This place has been too quiet for too long. Maybe you'll remind Garrick he's still human. He left before she could respond. Eleanor sat on the bed, her body finally beginning to relax now that she wasn't moving or freezing or both. Through the floor she could hear the murmur of male voices, Boone and the others talking about supplies and weather and trap lines. She should have felt terrified. She was isolated in the mountains with 4 men she barely knew, miles from anything resembling civilization. No way to leave if things went wrong. No one to hear her scream. But instead of terror, Eleanor felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being judged against an impossible standard, wasn't being measured and found wanting. She was just here, present, chosen for exactly what she was. She fell asleep still dressed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. The cold woke her before dawn. Eleanor jerked upright, disoriented. Gray light filtered through the window, barely enough to see by. Her breath misted in the air. Sometime during the night, the fire downstairs must have died down. She stumbled to the window and looked out. The view stole what little breath the cold had left her. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks catching the first rays of sunlight and turning gold and pink. The valley below was still dark, wrapped in shadow. Pine forest spread like a rough carpet, broken by white expanses of snow and frozen streams that caught the light like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful and terrible and completely indifferent to her existence. A knock on the door made her jump. You awake? Boone's voice gruff. Yes. Get dressed warm. We're going out. Eleanor looked down at herself. I'm already dressed. Warmer than that. Check the dresser. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. Curious, Eleanor opened the dresser and found it full of men's clothing. Wool shirts, thick trousers, knitted socks. All too large for her, but infinitely more practical than her soaked dress. She changed quickly, rolling up sleeves and pant legs. The clothes were warm at least, and she found a leather belt that kept the trousers from falling off her hips. Downstairs, Boone was waiting by the door with Marcus. Both men looked her over critically. Better, Boone said. You'll need these too. He handed her a heavy coat lined with fur, gloves, and a knitted cap. Put them on. Eleanor obeyed, drowning in the oversized coat. Can you shoot? Boone asked. A gun? No, compliments. Yes, a gun. I've never held one. Boone sighed. Of course you haven't. All right, first lesson. Don't touch anything that looks like a trigger until I tell you to. Understood? Understood. He handed her a rifle that felt impossibly heavy in her hands. That's a Sharps, he said. Accurate, reliable, kicks like a mule. You'll learn to love it. and hate it in equal measure. He picked up his own rifle, larger and more worn. Follow me. Watch where I step. Don't wander off. Questions? Where are we going? Hunting. The storm pushed the elk down from the high country. We need meat for the winter stores. He glanced at Marcus. Keep the fire going. Always do, Marcus said. He looked at Eleanor. Try not to shoot him. He's surprisingly useful when he's not being insufferable. Outside, the cold hit Eleanor like a fist. Despite all the layers, it found ways to seep in, through the gap between gloves and sleeves, around the collar of her coat. Her breath came in white clouds. Boone led her away from the lodge, into the forest. The snow was knee-deep in places, making every step an effort. Eleanor struggled to keep up with his long strides. You're stomping, he said without turning around, making enough noise to scare every animal in 5 miles. I'm trying to walk through snow that's nearly to my waist. Then try quieter. Eleanor gritted her teeth and focused on stepping where Boone stepped, using the paths he broke through the drifts. It helped, but not much. They walked for what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow blindingly bright. Eleanor's eyes watered from the glare. Finally, Boone stopped and crouched behind a fallen log. He gestured for Eleanor to get down beside him. Look, he whispered, pointing. Across a small clearing, half hidden in the trees, stood 3 elk, massive creatures with antlers like tree branches, their breath steaming in the cold air. They pawed at the snow, searching for frozen grass underneath. Beautiful, aren't they? Boone's voice was barely audible. Eleanor nodded, mesmerized. Now watch. In one smooth motion, Boone raised his rifle, sighted, and fired. The sound cracked across the clearing like thunder. One of the elk dropped instantly. The other 2 bolted, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing. Boone stood and walked toward his kill, Eleanor following numbly. She'd seen death before. Rats in the orphanage, horses in the street after accidents. But this felt different. More deliberate. More real. The elk was already dead, a clean shot through the heart. Boone knelt beside it, running his hand along its flank almost reverently. This animal will feed us for weeks, he said. Every part gets used. Meat, hide, antlers, bones. Nothing wasted. That's the first rule of mountain living. Respect what you take. He pulled a knife from his belt. Turn around if you need to. Eleanor forced herself to watch as Boone field-dressed the elk. It was brutal, efficient work. Blood steamed in the cold air. The smell of it, copper and musk, made her stomach turn. But she didn't look away. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Because if I die or get injured, you need to know how to do it yourself. He worked steadily, his hands sure despite the gore. Up here, delicate sensibilities will get you killed. You need to see the ugly parts, do the ugly parts, and keep going anyway. I can do that. We'll see. By the time they finished, Eleanor's hands were stiff with cold and streaked with blood. Boone tied the elk's legs together and hauled it onto his shoulders like it weighed nothing. The massive carcass had to be 200 pounds at least. You're carrying that back? Eleanor asked, incredulous. Unless you want to leave it for the wolves. Can't we drag it? Could. But dragging tears up the meat and attracts predators. This is faster. He started walking. Keep up. The return trip was harder. Boone moved slower under the weight, but he never stopped, never complained. Eleanor followed in his wake, her legs burning with exhaustion. Halfway back, they heard howling. Eleanor froze. Keep moving, Boone said calmly. They're just curious. Just curious? Wolves are smart. They know I'm armed and I'm bigger than them. They'll follow, maybe, but they won't attack unless they're desperate or rabid. More howls echoed through the trees, closer now. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Boone. Eleanor. He stopped and turned to face her. You trust me? She hesitated, then nodded. Then trust me when I say we're fine. Keep walking. Don't run. Don't show fear. They continued. Eleanor could feel eyes on her, tracking from the shadows. She glimpsed movement between the trees, gray shapes pacing parallel to their path. Boone started singing. It was the last thing Eleanor expected. His voice was rough, but surprisingly melodic, some old ballad about a ship in a storm. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. The wolves fell back. By the time they reached the lodge, the howling had faded entirely. Marcus met them at the door. "Successful hunt, I see." "Big one, too." Boone lowered the elk to the ground with a grunt. Eleanor helped. "I didn't do anything," Eleanor protested. "You kept up. You didn't panic when the wolves showed. You watched me dress the kill without puking." He looked at her directly. "That's more than most manage on day one." Something warm flickered in Eleanor's chest. Pride, maybe? Or just relief at not being a complete failure. "Come on," Marcus said. "Both of you need to wash up before you bring that much blood into my clean kitchen." The next week fell into a brutal rhythm. Eleanor woke before dawn every morning to find Boone already up, usually doing something that required more strength or skill than she possessed. Chopping wood, repairing roof damage from the storm, hauling water from the spring that ran year-round despite the cold. She tried to help with everything and succeeded at almost nothing. Her hands were too soft for the axe. She got blisters within an hour that burst and bled and made gripping anything agony. She couldn't lift the water buckets when they were full, had to fill them only halfway, and make twice as many trips. She sewed a tear in one of Boone's shirts and did such a poor job that Marcus quietly redid it when he thought she wasn't looking. The only thing she excelled at was cooking, and even that came with a learning curve. The cast iron stove was temperamental, the ingredients unfamiliar. But Eleanor had cooked in worse conditions, and food was food whether you made it in Philadelphia or on a mountain. Dutch and Pine left after 3 days, heading back to Black Hollow with promises to return in a month with supplies. Their departure left the lodge feeling emptier, quieter, more isolated. Eleanor found herself watching Boone, trying to understand him. He was a contradiction, brutal in his honesty, but surprisingly gentle in how he taught her things. He never mocked her failures, just corrected them and moved on. When she burned a pan of biscuits to charcoal, he ate them anyway and said they'd been worse. But he also maintained distance. He never touched her unnecessarily, never invaded her space. At night he disappeared to his room, and she didn't see him until morning. It was like living with a ghost who happened to need 3 meals a day. On the 8th day, Eleanor was outside struggling to split firewood when Marcus approached. "You're doing it wrong," he said. "Story of my life." He picked up the axe and demonstrated. "It's not about strength. It's about placement and follow-through. Hit the weak spot in the grain, let the weight of the axe do the work." The wood split clean on his first try. Eleanor tried to copy his technique. The axe bounced off the log and nearly took her foot off. "Better," Marcus said diplomatically. "Try again." After an hour of practice, Eleanor managed to split 3 logs successfully. Her shoulders screamed in protest, and her hands were bleeding through the bandages she'd wrapped around them that morning. "That's enough for today," Marcus said. "Come inside. I'll make tea." They sat at the kitchen table while water heated on the stove. Marcus studied her with that analytical physician's gaze. "You're not sleeping well," he observed. "How can you tell?" "Dark circles under your eyes. You're slower in the mornings than you were a few days ago, and you fell asleep in your chair after dinner last night." Eleanor sighed. "The bed's fine, the room's fine, I just can't seem to settle. It's the isolation. Takes time to adjust." He poured hot water over tea leaves. "When I first came here, I spent 3 months convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. Everything was harder than I expected, colder, lonelier. I actually packed my bags twice, ready to leave." "What stopped you?" "Garrick." Marcus smiled faintly. "He found me sitting outside with my packed bags, ready to walk back to civilization. He didn't try to convince me to stay, didn't give me a speech about toughing it out. He just said, 'If you leave now, you'll never know if you could have made it.' Then he went inside and left me to decide." "And you stayed." "And I stayed." He handed her a cup of tea. "My point is, everyone doubts themselves up here. The question isn't whether you'll want to quit. The question is whether you will quit." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Does Boone think I will?" "He doesn't talk about what he thinks, but he's teaching you, which means he believes you're worth the effort." "He hasn't said more than 10 words to me since Dutch and Pine left." Marcus laughed. "That's Garrick being social. You should have seen him before you arrived. We'd go whole days communicating in grunts and nods." "Why is he like this?" "So closed off." The smile faded from Marcus's face. "That's his story to tell, not mine. But I will say this. Garrick's had reasons to stop trusting people. Good reasons. The fact that he brought you here at all means something. Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened and Boone entered, carrying a brace of rabbits. "Dinner," he announced, dropping them on the counter. He looked at Eleanor. "You know how to skin these?" "No." "Then you're about to learn. Come here." Marcus excused himself, leaving Eleanor alone with Boone in the kitchen. He laid out the rabbits and handed her a knife. "First, you make a cut here," he said, demonstrating on one of the animals. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. "Shallow. You're separating hide from meat, not cutting through everything." Eleanor tried to copy him on the second rabbit. Her cut was too deep, too ragged. "Again," Boone said patiently. They worked in silence, Boone correcting her technique whenever she made a mistake. His hands occasionally covered hers, guiding the knife to the right angle. The touch was impersonal, practical, but Eleanor felt hyper-aware of it anyway. The calluses on his palms, the controlled strength in his fingers. "You're getting better," he said after the third rabbit. "Slower than molasses, but better. Should I take that as a compliment?" "Take it however you want." By the time they finished, Eleanor's hands were shaking from effort. Boone took the meat and started preparing it for cooking, moving around the kitchen with surprising comfort. "Where did you learn to cook?" Eleanor asked. "Here. Alone. You either learn or you starve." "Were you always alone?" His hands stilled for just a moment, then he resumed chopping. "No." Eleanor waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "I was," she said quietly. "Alone, I mean. The orphanage had other kids, but that's not the same as having someone. I learned early that nobody was going to take care of me except me." Boone glanced at her, something unreadable in his pale eyes. "That why you took the bride contract?" "Partly. Mostly I just wanted to be somewhere I wasn't the problem in every room I walked into." "And now you're on a mountain with a giant who sings to wolves. Quite the improvement." Eleanor laughed, surprised. "At least the wolves don't comment on my appearance." "The wolves have better manners than most men." They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less strained, almost companionable. That night, Eleanor lay in bed listening to the wind howl around the lodge. Her body ached in new places every day. Her hands were raw despite the bandages. She was exhausted to her bones. But for the first time since arriving, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually survive this. The feeling lasted until the bandits came. It started with the horses. Eleanor was hauling water from the spring 3 weeks into her stay at Frost Ridge when she heard them, restless in the small barn Boone had built into the hillside. Stamping, whinnying, the kind of agitation that meant something was wrong. She set down the half-filled bucket and approached carefully. The mare she'd ridden from Black Hollow pressed against the back of her stall, ears flat against her skull. The other horses were equally disturbed, eyes rolling white. "Easy," Eleanor murmured, reaching for the mare's halter. "What's got you so—" A hand clamped over her mouth. Eleanor's scream died in her throat as an arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She thrashed, drove her elbow back hard. It connected with something solid, and her attacker grunted but didn't let go. "Quit fighting," a male voice hissed in her ear. "Make this easy on yourself." Like hell. Eleanor bit down on the hand covering her mouth, tasting blood and dirt. The man cursed and loosened his grip just enough for her to wrench her head to the side. "Boone!" The scream tore out of her throat before the hand clamped down again, harder this time. "Shut her up," another voice said from somewhere behind her. Something hard cracked against the side of Eleanor's head. White light exploded across her vision. The world tilted sideways, and suddenly she was on the ground, snow soaking through her clothes. Boots appeared in her swimming vision. 3 pairs, maybe 4. "Feisty," the first man said. He crouched down, coming into focus slowly. Young, maybe 25, with a patchy beard and mean eyes. Boone always did like his women with some fight in them. Eleanor tried to push herself up. Her arms wouldn't cooperate properly. "Stay down," the man said, pressing his boot against her shoulder. "We ain't here for you. Just need to have a conversation with the mountain man about some property disputes." "Liar," Eleanor managed through split lips. She tasted blood. The man smiled. "Smart girl. Yeah, we're mostly here to rob him blind, but the property dispute thing sounds better, don't it?" Gunfire cracked from the direction of the lodge. All four men whipped around. Eleanor seized the moment, grabbed the nearest man's ankle, and yanked hard. He went down cursing, landing face first in the snow. She scrambled to her feet, stumbled, found her balance. Run! Her legs pumped, carrying her toward the lodge through snow that grabbed at her boots like hands. More gunfire, shouting, the sharp smell of powder smoke on the wind. She burst around the corner of the building and nearly ran straight into Marcus. He grabbed her shoulders. Are you hurt? 4 men, Eleanor gasped. By the barn. They grabbed me. Get inside. Now! Marcus thrust a revolver into her hands. You know how to use this? Point and shoot? Good enough. Lock the door. Don't open it unless you hear my voice or Garrick's. He was gone before she could argue, running toward the barn with his rifle raised. Eleanor stumbled to the lodge door. Her hand shook so badly she could barely turn the handle. Inside, the main room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, glass from a shattered window scattered across the floor. The fire still burned in the hearth, cheerful and oblivious. She locked the door and backed away from it, the revolver heavy in her grip. Her head throbbed where she'd been hit. When she touched the spot, her fingers came away bloody. Outside, the shooting intensified. Eleanor moved to the broken window, staying low. She could see Marcus crouched behind a water trough, firing methodically. Boone was nowhere visible, which somehow made her more frightened. At least 4 men she could count were spread across the clearing, using trees and the barn for cover. No, 5. Another one appeared from the tree line, this one better dressed than the others. Expensive coat, polished boots despite the snow. He walked into the open like he owned the place. Boone! The man called out, his voice carried across the clearing, cultured and smooth. I know you can hear me. We need to talk. Silence. My name is Silas Mercer, the man continued. Perhaps you've heard of me. I own most of the valley between here and Black Hollow. Going to own this mountain too once we settle some legal matters. A shot rang out from somewhere Eleanor couldn't see. Mercer didn't even flinch. The bullet had kicked up snow 3 feet to his left. A warning, not a miss. No, son. Now that's just rude, Mercer said. I came all this way for a civilized conversation. Get off my land. Boone's voice came from the roof. Eleanor's heart lurched. She hadn't even seen him climb up there. Your land, Mercer laughed. That's the matter I wanted to discuss. See, I've been doing some research. This mountain sits on what might be a very lucrative silver deposit. And according to territorial law, you can't claim mineral rights without proper documentation. I got documentation. Do you? Because I checked with the land office in Denver. They have no record of Garrick Boone filing a claim for Frost Ridge. Mercer spread his hands. Which means this land is open for anyone to claim. Like me, for instance. Another shot. This one closer to Mercer's feet. I'll take that as a no to reasonable negotiation, Mercer said. Shame. I was prepared to offer you fair compensation. He turned and walked back toward the tree line, unhurried. Boys, looks like we're doing this the hard way. Flush him out. The men opened fire. Eleanor dropped below the window as bullets shredded the remaining glass and punched holes in the timber walls. The sound was deafening, constant. She pressed herself against the floor, the revolver clutched to her chest. Something crashed upstairs. Eleanor's breath caught. Someone had gotten into the lodge. Footsteps overhead, heavy and deliberate, moving toward the stairs. She scrambled to her feet, raising the revolver with both hands. Her arms shook so badly the barrel wavered in circles. A man appeared at the top of the stairs, stocky, with a face like a pig and a rifle in his hands. His eyes found Eleanor and widened. Well, hell, he said. Ain't you the bride from Black Hollow? The fat one nobody wanted? Eleanor pulled the trigger. The revolver bucked in her hands with shocking force. The shot went wide, splintering the banister 3 feet from where the man stood. He laughed. You ever even shot a gun before, sweetheart? Eleanor cocked the hammer again, trying to remember everything Boone had taught her during their one practice session. Breathe. Aim. Don't jerk the trigger. The man started down the stairs, still laughing. Put that down before you hurt yourself. Eleanor fired again. This shot was better. The man cried out and stumbled, grabbing his shoulder where the bullet had torn through. Blood spread across his shirt, dark and wet. You shot me, he said, almost surprised. You actually shot me. Get out. Eleanor's voice didn't sound like her own. Get out, or the next one goes in your head. The man's face twisted with rage. He raised his rifle one-handed, awkward but deadly. The front door exploded inward. Boone came through it like a force of nature, tackling the man on the stairs before he could get a shot off. They went down in a tangle of limbs and violence. The rifle clattered across the floor. Eleanor couldn't see what happened next. The two men were moving too fast, too brutal. She heard impacts, grunts of pain, the wet sound of flesh hitting flesh. Then Boone stood, breathing hard, and the other man didn't. "You hurt?" Boone asked without looking at her. "No. Maybe. I don't know." "Stay inside. Bar the door after me." He grabbed the fallen rifle and was gone, back out into the chaos. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, staring at the man on the floor. He was still breathing, barely, blood pooling beneath him. She'd done that. She'd shot someone. No time to process. She dragged a heavy table across the ruined door. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it might slow them down. Then she reloaded the revolver with trembling fingers, spilling more bullets than she loaded. The shooting outside had become sporadic. Single shots instead of constant fire. Either Boone and Marcus were gaining ground or running out of ammunition. Eleanor moved back to the broken window, staying low. Marcus was still behind the water trough, but he wasn't shooting anymore. His head was down, one hand pressed to his side. Even from this distance, Eleanor could see blood between his fingers. "Marcus," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear her. One of Mercer's men broke from cover, running toward Marcus's position. Eleanor didn't think. She smashed out the remaining glass with the revolver barrel, aimed as best she could, and fired. The shot went wild, but it was close enough that the man dove for cover instead of continuing his charge. "Get away from him!" Eleanor screamed, firing again. Movement on the roof drew her attention. Boone was up there silhouetted against the gray sky. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession, so fast they almost sounded like one. 2 of Mercer's men went down. The third fell back, shouting for the others to retreat. Then Boone shifted position, and Mercer appeared from nowhere, rifle raised. "No!" The scream tore out of Eleanor's throat. Mercer fired. Boone jerked backward, twisted, and disappeared over the edge of the roof. Eleanor's world went silent except for the rushing of blood in her ears. She watched Boone's massive form fall, hit the snow-covered ground with a sound that carried even through her shock. He didn't get up. Something inside Eleanor broke and reformed into something harder. She climbed through the broken window, barely feeling the glass that cut her hands. Her feet hit the ground and she was running before conscious thought caught up. The revolver was in her hand. She'd fired 5 shots. 1 bullet left. Mercer stood over Boone's still form, reloading his rifle with calm efficiency. "Hey!" Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. Mercer turned, surprised. "You should have stayed inside, girl. This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't." She raised the revolver. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Mercer actually smiled. "You think you can shoot me? You can barely hold that thing steady." "Maybe, but I only need 1 shot to find out. Even if you hit me, my men will kill everyone here, including you." He gestured at the tree line where at least 3 more armed men were visible. "Be smart. This mountain ain't worth dying for." "You're wrong," Eleanor said. "It is." She pulled the trigger. The bullet caught Mercer high in the chest, spinning him around. His rifle fell from his hands. He staggered, looked down at the blood spreading across his expensive coat with an expression of genuine shock. "You shot me," he said, echoing his man from earlier. Then he collapsed into the snow. "Boss!" One of the men from the tree line started forward. A shot from Marcus's position, the doctor was still conscious, still fighting, sent the man diving for cover. "Your boss is down," Marcus shouted. "You want to die for his silver, or you want to walk away?" Silence stretched out. Eleanor stood with the empty revolver still pointed at Mercer's fallen body, every muscle locked tight. "Hell with this," someone said from the trees. "Ain't getting paid enough to die." The sound of horses, men retreating in panic. Within seconds, the clearing was empty except for the dead and wounded. Eleanor dropped the revolver and ran to Boone. He lay on his back in the snow, blood soaking through his coat on the left side. His eyes were closed, his face gray beneath the beard. For one horrible moment, Eleanor thought he was dead. Then his chest moved, a shallow breath. "Boone." She fell to her knees beside him, hands hovering uselessly. There was so much blood. "Boone, stay with me." His eyes cracked open, pale and unfocused. "Eleanor?" I'm here. You're going to be fine. Liar. His mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Mercer? Dead. I killed him. Good. His eyes drifted closed again. Good. Marcus, Eleanor screamed. I need help. The doctor staggered over, one hand still pressed to his side. His face was pale with blood loss, but his hands were steady as he examined Boone. Bullet went through, Marcus said. Missed the lung, but tore up muscle. He's losing blood fast. He looked at Eleanor. Can you help me get him inside? Yes. Tell me what to do. Together, they dragged Boone across the snow. He was dead weight, impossibly heavy. Eleanor's back screamed in protest, but she didn't stop, didn't slow. They got him through the door and onto the table Eleanor had cleared with one sweep of her arm. Boil water, Marcus ordered. I need clean cloth, needle, and thread from my medical kit upstairs and whiskey. Move. Eleanor moved. The next hours blurred together in a nightmare of blood and pain. Marcus worked on Boone with grim determination despite his own injury, which turned out to be a deep graze along his ribs. Eleanor assisted however she could, holding Boone down when Marcus had to dig for bullet fragments, wiping blood, passing instruments. Boone woke twice. Once to curse fluently in what sounded like French. Once to grab Eleanor's wrist with surprising strength and say, Don't let me die alone. You're not dying, Eleanor said fiercely, and you're not alone. He passed out again before she finished speaking. By the time Marcus finally stepped back from the table, his hands were shaking with exhaustion. That's all I can do. Rest and time will tell the difference now. Will he live? He should. Garrick survived worse, though I hesitate to remind him of that when he's conscious. Marcus swayed on his feet. Eleanor caught him before he fell. Sit down before you join him on the table. She bandaged Marcus's ribs while he protested weakly that he was fine. He wasn't fine. None of them were fine. The lodge looked like a war zone. Broken furniture, blood on the floor, bullet holes in the walls. 3 dead men lay in the snow outside, and somewhere out there Silas Mercer's body was slowly freezing. Eleanor covered Boone with every blanket she could find and built up the fire until the room was almost too warm. Then she collapsed into a chair and stared at nothing. You saved his life, Marcus said quietly. He saved mine first, in Black Hollow. I'm not talking about Black Hollow. I'm talking about today. You could have hidden, could have run. Instead, you shot a man to protect Garrick. Eleanor looked at her hands. They were covered in blood, some hers from the glass, most from Boone. I didn't think. I just moved. That's what courage looks like. Not thinking, just doing what needs to be done. I killed someone, Marcus. The words came out small, frightened. That man, Mercer. I looked him in the eye and killed him. Yes, you did. And if you hadn't, we'd all be dead right now. Marcus leaned forward, wincing. I won't tell you killing doesn't matter. It does. It should. But Eleanor, you defended your home, protected the people who've come to care about you. There's no shame in that. The people who've come to care about you. The words lodged somewhere in Eleanor's chest, warm and painful. She stood abruptly. I need to check the bodies. Make sure they're actually dead. Eleanor, I need to do something, Marcus. I can't just sit here. Outside, the temperature had dropped with the setting sun. Eleanor moved from body to body, checking for pulses she knew she wouldn't find. The man she'd shot in the lodge had died while they were working on Boone. The 2 Boone had hit from the roof were already cold. Mercer lay where he'd fallen, his expensive coat soaked through with blood. Eleanor knelt beside him, searching his pockets. She found a silver pocket watch, a leather wallet thick with bills, and folded papers. The papers were land claims, titles to half the valley, all filed under Mercer's name. And at the bottom, a document claiming Frost Ridge based on abandoned property laws. Eleanor took everything and went back inside. Boone was still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Marcus had fallen asleep in his chair, exhausted beyond endurance. Eleanor added wood to the fire and sat down beside Boone's makeshift bed. She unfolded the land documents, reading by firelight. Mercer hadn't been lying about the silver. The geological survey attached to the claim estimated significant deposits throughout the mountain. Worth enough to kill for, apparently. Worth enough to die for. Eleanor looked at Boone's still face, the blood-stained bandages Marcus had wrapped around his chest. This giant man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who taught her to shoot and skin rabbits and survive in a world that wanted her dead. She folded the papers carefully and placed them in the fire. The documents curled and blackened, turning to ash. Let Mercer's empire burn with him. This mountain belonged to Boone, legal claim or not. It belonged to him through blood and stubbornness and the simple fact that he refused to leave. Eleanor reached out and took Boone's hand, massive, calloused, warm enough that she knew he was still fighting. "Don't you dare die," she whispered. "We're not done yet." His fingers twitched against hers. Might have been a response. Might have been nothing. Eleanor held on anyway. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. "Eleanor!" Marcus's voice, urgent. "He's got a fever." Eleanor jerked upright. She'd fallen asleep slumped over Boone's bedside. Her neck screamed in protest as she straightened. Boone's face was flushed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. When Eleanor touched his skin, the heat was alarming. "How long?" she asked. "Started about an hour ago. I've been trying to bring it down with cold compresses, but it's not working." Marcus looked terrified, which terrified Eleanor more than anything else. If it keeps climbing, he could have seizures, brain damage, death. What do we do? Keep him cool. Get fluids in him if he wakes, and pray the infection doesn't take hold in his lungs. They worked through the night. Eleanor ran between the lodge and the spring, hauling bucket after bucket of icy water. She soaked cloths and laid them across Boone's forehead, his chest, anywhere the heat seemed worst. When the cloths warmed too quickly, she replaced them. Boone thrashed in his unconsciousness, muttering words Eleanor couldn't understand. Once he screamed, a sound of such raw agony that Eleanor nearly dropped the bucket she was carrying. "It's the fever," Marcus said, though he looked shaken. "He's not really here." But he was here. His body was here, fighting an invisible battle Eleanor couldn't help with. Near dawn, Boone's eyes opened. "Sarah," he said clearly, "don't leave. Please don't leave." Eleanor froze. "Boone, it's Eleanor. You're at the lodge. You were shot, but you're going to be—" "I'm sorry." His eyes were open, but seeing something else, someone else. "I should have been there. Should have protected you." A tear tracked down his fever-flushed face. "Who's Sarah?" Eleanor asked Marcus quietly. "His wife," Marcus whispered back. "She died 6 years ago. Childbirth. The baby too. Garrick was on the trap line when it happened. By the time he got back, he didn't finish." Eleanor's heart clenched. She understood now, the isolation, the distance, the way Boone held everyone at arm's length. He'd lost everything once and built walls high enough that it could never happen again. "Boone," she took his burning hand. "Listen to me. Sarah's not here. I'm sorry, but she's not. I'm Eleanor. You pulled me out of Black Hollow, remember? You taught me to shoot. You're at Frost Ridge and you need to fight because I can't do this without you." His eyes focused slightly. "Eleanor?" "Yes. I'm here." "You shot Mercer." "I did." "Good." His hand tightened on hers. Don't leave." "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise." "I promise, you stubborn bastard. Now stop talking and save your strength." Something that might have been a laugh rattled in his chest. Then his eyes drifted closed again. But the fever broke an hour later. Eleanor watched the flush fade from his face, the sweat dry on his skin. His breathing deepened, evened out, became the breath of true sleep rather than unconscious struggle. She finally let herself cry. Marcus found her like that, sitting on the floor beside Boone's bed, tears streaming down her face, still holding the giant's hand. "He's going to make it," Marcus said gently. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. "You should rest. You've been up for 2 days straight. So have you. I'm a doctor. I'm used to it." He helped her to her feet. "Go. Sleep. I'll watch him." Eleanor made it halfway up the stairs before exhaustion took her. She sat down hard on the steps, her legs simply giving out. Marcus appeared beside her. "Come on. Just a little farther." He got her to her room somehow. Eleanor collapsed onto the bed fully dressed, too tired to even remove her boots. Sleep took her under like a black tide. She dreamed of gunfire and blood and Boone falling from the roof over and over again. She dreamed of Mercer's eyes as she pulled the trigger. She dreamed of a woman named Sarah who died alone while her husband was miles away in the mountains. When she woke, 3 days had passed. Eleanor stumbled downstairs to find Boone sitting up at the table, eating soup with grim determination. He looked like death, pale, gaunt, moving like everything hurt, but he was alive. His eyes found her. "You look worse than I feel." Liar. "Probably." He set down his spoon. "Marcus told me what you did, how you shot Mercer, stood your ground when you could have run." Eleanor crossed to the fire, needing something to do with her hands. "You would have done the same. That ain't the point. The point is you're not the same scared woman I pulled out of Black Hollow. You've changed. So have you. You haven't called me useless in weeks. You shot a man to save my life. Pretty sure that disqualifies you from useless." Eleanor turned to face him. "Why didn't you tell me about Sarah?" Boone went still. "Marcus talks too much." "You said her name during the fever. You thought I was her." "I don't remember that." "Boone, I don't want to talk about it." His voice went flat, final. "Some things are private." "Fine. Keep your secrets." Eleanor heard the anger in her voice and didn't care. "But you should know that I burned Mercer's land claims. All of them. As far as the territorial office knows, Frost Ridge doesn't exist." Boone stared at her. "You did what?" "I destroyed the documents. If anyone comes asking about Mercer's property, there's no proof he ever claimed this mountain." She crossed her arms. "You're welcome." "Eleanor, those papers could have been worth—" "I don't care what they were worth. This is your home. You built it. You earned it. Some rich bastard doesn't get to take it just because he filed paperwork in Denver." Silence stretched between them. Then Boone laughed. It was short, pained, but genuine. "You burned evidence of a legal land claim to protect squatters' rights to a mountain." "I did. That might be the most illegal thing anyone's done for me. Add it to shooting Mercer. I'm racking up quite a criminal record." Boone studied her with those pale eyes. "You could leave, you know. Take Mercer's money, catch a train east, start over somewhere civilized. Nobody would blame you after what happened." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Is that what you want?" "I'm saying you have a choice. You didn't sign up for gun battles and killing men. That ain't fair to you." "Fair?" Eleanor felt something hot and fierce rise in her chest. "Nothing about my life has been fair. The orphanage wasn't fair. Philadelphia wasn't fair. Black Hollow definitely wasn't fair. But you know what? I'm done waiting for fair." She moved to stand in front of him, ignoring how he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "You chose me when everyone else saw garbage. You taught me to survive. You trusted me with a gun and your home and your life. So no, I'm not leaving. This mountain is mine now too, legal or not. You want me gone? You're going to have to drag me down yourself." Boone's expression was unreadable. "You're sure?" "I shot a man to protect this place. I think that makes me pretty damn sure." "Then we got work to do." He started to stand, winced, and sat back down. "Once I can move without feeling like I'm being stabbed." "You're not doing anything except healing," Marcus said from the doorway. Neither of them had heard him approach. "Doctor's orders. That means rest, liquids, and absolutely no manual labor for at least 2 weeks." "2 weeks?" Boone protested. "There's bodies to bury, walls to repair, which Eleanor and I can handle," Marcus interrupted. "You're going to sit there and eat your soup and be grateful you're not dead." Boone looked mutinous but didn't argue further. Over the next weeks, Eleanor discovered muscles she didn't know existed. She and Marcus buried the dead in shallow graves blasted from the frozen ground with powder and picks. Hard, brutal work that left Eleanor's hands raw and bleeding. They repaired the broken windows, patched bullet holes, cleaned blood from every surface until no trace of the battle remained. Boone watched from his chair, offering advice that usually amounted to, "You're doing it wrong," without specifying how to do it right. "I'm starting to understand why you live alone," Eleanor said after the 5th such comment. "I don't live alone anymore," Boone pointed out. "I live with a woman who argues with everything I say and a doctor who won't let me work." "Sounds terrible," Marcus said without looking up from the window he was installing. "You should definitely send us away." "Can't. Eleanor would probably shoot me." "Probably," Eleanor agreed. Something had shifted between them. The walls Boone kept so carefully maintained had developed cracks. He still didn't talk about Sarah, still disappeared into himself sometimes, but the silences felt different now, less like barriers and more like comfortable pauses. One evening, Eleanor was cooking dinner when Boone spoke from his chair by the fire. "I was on the trap line till," he said quietly, "when Sarah went into labor. Wasn't supposed to be gone more than 3 days, but a storm came in, pinned me down for a week. By the time I got back," he stared into the flames, "Marcus did everything he could, but the baby was breech, and Sarah was small, and there was just too much blood." Eleanor set down her spoon and went to sit beside him. She didn't speak, just listened. "I blame myself," Boone continued. "Should have been there. Should have known somehow. Should have never left her alone." His hands clenched into fists. "I buried them on the ridge above the lodge and swore I'd never let anyone get close enough to hurt like that again." "And then you went to Black Hollow," Eleanor said softly. "And then I went to Black Hollow." He finally looked at her. "Saw you standing there taking hit after hit, and I thought, there's someone who understands survival, someone strong enough to make it up here, someone I could trust to hold their own." "You were wrong," Eleanor said. "I wasn't strong. I was terrified every single day. Being scared and being weak ain't the same thing." Boone reached out and took her hand, a gesture so unexpected that Eleanor almost pulled away. "You stayed. You learned. You fought when you had to. That's strength." His hand was warm, calloused, twice the size of hers. "I'm glad you chose me," Eleanor said, "even if you are the surliest man I've ever met." "Surly keeps people at a safe distance. Too late for that now." Boone's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. "Yeah, I noticed." They sat in silence as the fire crackled and dinner simmered on the stove. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, steady, covering the graves and bullet scars until the mountain looked peaceful once more. But Eleanor knew better now. Peace was temporary. Violence could come from anywhere, anytime. The only defense was to be ready, be strong, and refuse to break. She'd learned that lesson in blood and gunpowder, and she'd be damned if she ever forgot it. Spring came to Frost Ridge like a thief, stealing winter's grip one handful of snow at a time. Eleanor stood on the lodge porch watching water drip from the eaves, each drop catching sunlight before disappearing into the mud below. 2 months had passed since the siege. 2 months since she'd killed a man and watched Boone nearly die on the snow-covered ground. The mountain showed no signs of that violence now. New grass pushed through melting drifts. Birds returned to the pine trees, filling the air with songs that sounded almost cheerful. The world moved on like nothing had happened, but everything had happened. "You're up early," Marcus said, emerging from the lodge with 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed her one and leaned against the porch railing. "Couldn't sleep?" "Kept thinking about Black Hollow," Eleanor admitted, wondering if news about Mercer has reached them yet. "Dutch rode through last week. Said the town's in chaos. Mercer's business partners are fighting over his assets like vultures. Nobody knows what happened to him." Marcus sipped his coffee. "Dutch played dumb, of course. Said he hadn't seen Mercer since before the first snow." "And they believed him?" "They believed what they wanted to believe. That Silas Mercer rode into the mountains alone and got himself killed by weather, or animals, or bad luck." He glanced at her. "Your name hasn't come up once." Eleanor should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollow. She'd ended a man's life and the world barely noticed. It was somehow worse than if there had been consequences. "You ever killed anyone?" she asked quietly. "Before Mercer's men?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Once, back in Chicago. A man came into my clinic with a knife, high on opium, demanding medicine. He went for my nurse. I had a scalpel in my hand." He stared into his coffee. "It was him or her. I made the choice. Doesn't mean I sleep well with it." "Does it get easier?" "No, but you learn to carry it." The door opened and Boone stepped out, moving with only a slight hitch in his stride now. The wound had healed into an angry red scar that would eventually fade to match the others decorating his body. He'd been cleared for full work a week ago and had thrown himself into repairing winter damage with an intensity that worried Eleanor. "We need supplies," he announced without preamble. "Sugar, flour, salt, ammunition, coffee if Dutch can get it." "I'll make a list," Eleanor said. "Make 2. One for essentials, one for luxuries we can't afford." Boone looked out at the valley. Also need to think about expanding the garden plot. 3 people eat more than 1. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging that Eleanor and Marcus were permanent fixtures at Frost Ridge. Eleanor caught Marcus's eye and saw her own surprise reflected there. "I can handle a garden," Eleanor said. "Grew vegetables at the orphanage." Boone nodded. "Good. You'll teach Marcus. He kills everything green he touches." "That happened one time," Marcus protested, "and those herbs were already dying. They were mint. Mint grows in cracks in stone. You have to actively try to kill mint." Eleanor hid her smile behind her coffee cup as the 2 men bickered. This had become routine. Boone needling Marcus with deadpan observations, Marcus responding with wounded dignity, neither one actually angry. It reminded Eleanor of brothers, if brothers were a surly mountain giant and a physician who quoted Shakespeare when he thought no one was listening. "When do you want to ride for supplies?" Marcus asked. "Day after tomorrow, soon as the low trail clears enough for the horses." Boone looked at Eleanor. "You're coming." It wasn't a question. "Why?" Eleanor asked, suspicious of his tone. "Because you need to know the route. Need to know which traders are honest and which will rob you blind. Need to show Black Hollow you're still alive and you belong to Frost Ridge." He drained his coffee in one swallow. "And because I'm tired of you asking questions about the outside world, easier to just show you." Eleanor's heart picked up speed. She hadn't left the mountain since arriving. The idea of riding back down to Black Hollow, seeing those people again, made her stomach twist. "What if someone recognizes me?" she asked. "They will," Boone said flatly. "That's the point. You walk in there with your head up, you let them see what you've become, and you dare them to say one word about it." "What have I become?" Boone's pale eyes met hers. "Dangerous." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus cleared his throat. "I'll stay here. Someone needs to watch the place, and I've got medical journals to catch up on." "Liar," Boone said without heat. "You just hate dealing with people." "That too." They spent the next day preparing. Eleanor helped Boone check the horses, repair tack that had rotted over winter, and pack supplies for the journey. She cleaned her revolver now, Boone had said when he gave it to her permanently, and loaded it with hands that no longer shook. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her room listening to the lodge settle around her. Somewhere down the hall, Boone's door opened and closed. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the creak of the front door. Curious, Eleanor rose and went to the window. Boone stood in the clearing, illuminated by moonlight. He was looking up at the ridge where he'd buried Sarah and their child. Eleanor couldn't see his expression from this distance, but she didn't need to. She understood what it meant to carry ghosts. She almost went down to join him. Almost. Instead, she gave him his privacy and went back to bed, listening to him return an hour later and climb the stairs with heavy steps. They left at dawn. The trail down the mountain was muddy and treacherous, forcing the horses to pick their way carefully around washouts and fallen trees. Eleanor rode in silence, watching the landscape change as they descended. The high pine forest gave way to aspen groves, then scrub brush, then the first signs of human habitation, a trapper's cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. "That's old Samuel," Boone said, nodding toward the cabin. "Keeps to himself. Good man if you need help, but don't ask him about the war. Any war. He'll talk for 3 hours." They passed other cabins, other trappers who raised hands in greeting when they saw Boone. One man actually stopped his work to stare as they rode by. "That the bride from Black Hollow?" he called out. "That's Mrs. Boone," Garrett called back without slowing. Eleanor's head whipped around. "Mrs. Boone?" "Easier than explaining the truth," Boone said. "Up here, people assume. Let them assume. But we're not. I know what we're not. But the bride company will have questions if they think I didn't honor the contract. Questions lead to legal trouble. Legal trouble brings lawmen. Lawmen bring attention we don't need." He had a point, but Eleanor still felt strange hearing herself called Mrs. Boone, like wearing someone else's clothes. Black Hollow appeared around midday, looking exactly as Eleanor remembered, rough, dirty, clinging to the mountainside like a stubborn barnacle. The same wooden buildings, the same muddy streets, even the same men lounging outside the saloon, though they'd traded winter coats for shirt sleeves. Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins. "Easy," Boone said quietly. "They can't hurt you anymore. They never could hurt me. Eleanor said, surprised by the truth of it. I was already hurt. They just reminded me. They rode into town side by side. The effect was immediate. Work stopped. Conversations died. Every eye in Black Hollow turned to watch Garrick Boone and the woman nobody had wanted ride down the main street like they owned it. Boone guided them to the trading post, a long, low building that smelled of tobacco and leather and mice. A bell chimed as they entered. The trader behind this counter looked up, recognized Boone, and went pale. "Mr. Boone," he stammered. "Didn't expect, that is, we heard rumors about—" "Dutch sent word I'd be coming," Boone interrupted. "You got my supplies ready?" "Yes, sir. Everything on the list." The trader's eyes kept darting to Eleanor. "And the lady—" "My wife," Boone said. "Eleanor." The title still felt strange in Eleanor's ears, but she raised her chin and met the trader's gaze steadily. "Ma'am," the trader said, bobbing his head nervously. "Pleasure to see you again. You're looking— well." Eleanor almost laughed. She probably looked half wild. Her hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing men's clothes, a revolver visible on her hip. Nothing like the desperate woman who'd stood in the square 6 months ago. "Thank you," she said simply. They inspected the supplies while the trader hovered anxiously. Boone checked every item with meticulous care, rejecting 3 bags of flour that had gone damp and a coil of rope that showed signs of rot. "I'll replace them," the trader assured him. "No charge for the damaged goods." "Appreciated." Boone counted out payment in gold coins. "We'll load up and be gone within the hour." Outside, a crowd had gathered. Eleanor recognized some faces from the bride selection. The beaver-coat trader stood near the front, his expression sour. Several miners she didn't know. And Mrs. Hutchins, the wagon mistress, looking older and more tired than Eleanor remembered. "Well," the beaver-coat trader said loudly, "look who came crawling back to civilization." Eleanor felt Boone tense beside her, but she put a hand on his arm. "Let me." She stepped forward, off the porch, until she stood level with the trader. He was shorter than she remembered. Or maybe she'd just gotten used to looking up at Boone. "I didn't crawl anywhere," Eleanor said clearly. "I rode down on my own horse, from my own home, to conduct my own business. Same as you're doing, I expect." "Your home?" The trader laughed, but it sounded forced. "That mountain fortress with the crazy giant, that's not a home, girl, that's a prison." "Funny. From where I'm standing, you're the one who looks trapped." The crowd murmured. Someone snickered. The trader's face flushed. "You think you're better than us now, because you spread your legs for—" He didn't finish. Boone moved like lightning, crossing the distance and lifting the trader off his feet by his collar. The coins in Boone's other hand scattered across the mud. "Finish that sentence," Boone said quietly. "Please." The trader made choking sounds, his feet kicking uselessly. "Garrick," Eleanor said. "Put him down." Boone didn't move. "He's not worth it," Eleanor continued, "and I don't need you to fight my battles." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Boone released the trader, who collapsed into the mud, gasping. "She's right," Boone said, looking down at the man. "You're not worth the effort, but understand something. You talk about my wife like that again, and I'll come back here and burn your trading post to the ground with you inside it. Clear?" The trader nodded frantically. Boone turned to the crowd. "Anyone else got comments? Now's the time." Silence. "Good." He began gathering the scattered coins. Eleanor knelt to help him, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked. Mrs. Hutchins approached carefully. "Miss Vale, Mrs. Boone, might I have a word?" Eleanor stood, wary. "What is it?" "I wanted to apologize," the older woman said quietly, "for how I handled the bride selection, for making you stand there and endure such cruelty. I should have done better by you." Eleanor studied her face, looking for deception. She found only tired regret. "I survived it," Eleanor said finally. "Turns out being chosen last was the best thing that could have happened to me. Still, you deserved better." Mrs. Hutchins glanced at Boone, who was loading supplies onto the horses. "He's a good man. Rough, but good. I hope you're happy." "I am," Eleanor said, and realized it was true. They finished loading and mounted their horses. As they rode out of Black Hollow, Eleanor looked back once. The crowd still stood in the street, watching them leave. Let them watch. Let them see what happened when you underestimated someone. Let them wonder. The ride back to Frost Ridge took longer than the descent. The horses were loaded heavy and the trail climbed steeply. They stopped twice to rest the animals and eat jerky from their packs. During the second stop, Boone spoke without looking at her. "You handled that well. The traitor. I've had practice being insulted. Still, some women would have let me break his face. Some women might have broken it themselves." Eleanor tore off a piece of jerky with her teeth. "But you were right about what you said before. I'm dangerous now. Dangerous people don't need to prove it with fists." Boone's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. They reached Frost Ridge just before sunset. Marcus met them at the door, looking relieved. "Trouble?" Boone asked. "None, just boring. How was town?" "Educational," Eleanor said, sliding off her horse. Her legs were stiff from the long ride. "I apparently have a reputation now." "As what?" "The woman who survived Garrick Boone," Eleanor said with dark humor. "They're taking bets on how long I'll last." "Idiots," Marcus said. "If anything, Garrick's surviving you." Eleanor laughed and went inside to help unload supplies while the men handled the horses. The lodge felt welcoming after the hostile atmosphere of Black Hollow, warm, familiar, safe. Home. The word still felt strange, but Eleanor was beginning to accept it. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Eleanor worked on expanding the garden plot, turning hard earth and removing rocks until her back screamed. Marcus helped when his medical duties allowed, which wasn't often. Word had spread that a real doctor lived at Frost Ridge, and trappers started showing up with injuries ranging from infected cuts to broken bones. Boone worked the trap lines and hunted, keeping their stores full. He also began teaching Eleanor more advanced survival skills, how to track deer through mud, how to find north without a compass, how to predict weather by watching the sky. "Why do I need to know this?" Eleanor asked one afternoon as Boone showed her how to identify edible plants. "Because someday I might not be here to teach you," he said simply. "Someday you might need to survive alone." The words sent a chill through her despite the warm sun. "You planning on going somewhere?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Planning on staying alive as long as possible, but mountains have a way of making their own plans." He straightened, looking at her seriously. "Everyone up here needs to know how to survive alone. It's not pessimism, it's reality." Eleanor thought of Sarah, dying alone while Boone was trapped by a storm. She understood his need to prepare her, even if she hated the reason behind it. "Then teach me," she said. "Teach me everything." And he did. Summer arrived with explosive heat that turned the meadows around Frost Ridge into seas of wildflowers. Eleanor had never seen anything like it. Purple lupine, yellow arnica, red paintbrush, all competing for space under the relentless sun. She picked armfuls and brought them inside, filling the lodge with color and the heavy scent of pollen. "You're making my eyes water," Marcus complained, sneezing into a handkerchief. "Suffer," Eleanor said cheerfully. "After 6 months of snow, I'm enjoying flowers." She was hanging a bunch from the mantel when Boone came in carrying a wooden box. "Got something for you," he said, setting it on the table. Eleanor approached cautiously. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside the box lay a rifle, smaller and lighter than the sharps Boone had been teaching her to shoot, with intricate scrollwork carved into the stock. "It was Sarah's," Boone said quietly. "Her father gave it to her when she turned 16. She was a better shot than me, though I'd never admit it while she was alive." He lifted the rifle out and handed it to Eleanor. "It's been sitting in storage for 6 years. Seems wrong to keep it locked away when it could be useful." Eleanor held the rifle carefully, aware of the weight of what she was being given. This wasn't just a weapon, it was trust, memory, permission to stand where Sarah had stood. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I'm sure." Boone met her eyes. "Sarah would have liked you, would have appreciated someone who doesn't take nonsense from anyone." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You still need to prove you can hit what you're aiming at." They went outside and Boone set up targets, cans balanced on fence posts at various distances. He showed Eleanor how to adjust her stance for the lighter rifle, how to account for wind, how to breathe through the shot instead of holding her breath. Her first 3 shots missed entirely. "You're anticipating the recoil," Boone said, "tensing up before you pull the trigger. Relax." "Easy for you to say." "Nothing about this is easy. That's why it's worth learning. Eleanor forced herself to relax, to trust the rifle, to squeeze instead of pull. The fourth shot pinged off a can, sending it flying. "Better," Boone said. Again. They practiced until Eleanor's shoulder ached from the recoil and her hands cramped from gripping the stock, but by the end she was hitting more than she missed. "You're a natural," Boone observed as they walked back to the lodge. "Or I had a good teacher." "Can it be both?" Eleanor smiled. "I suppose it can." That night they ate dinner on the porch, enjoying the cool evening air after the day's heat. Marcus had roasted a chicken somehow acquired from a passing trader, and Eleanor had made biscuits that were only slightly burned on the bottom. "This is pleasant," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Almost civilized." "Don't get used to it," Boone warned. "Summer doesn't last long up here." "Can't you let us enjoy one moment without predicting doom?" Eleanor asked. "I'm not predicting doom. I'm preparing you for reality." "Same thing with you." Marcus laughed. "She's got you there." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the distance, an elk bugled, a sound Eleanor had learned to identify over the months. "Dutch sent word he's coming up next week," Boone said. "Said he's got news from Denver." "What kind of news?" Eleanor asked. "Didn't say, but Dutch doesn't make special trips for gossip." Boone's expression was troubled. "Could be about Mercer, could be territorial politics, could be nothing." "Your optimism is inspiring," Marcus said dryly. Dutch arrived 6 days later with Pine and 2 pack horses loaded with supplies. They also brought a woman, middle-aged, worn-looking, with determined eyes and a sleeping infant strapped to her chest. "This is Catherine Marsh," Dutch said as they dismounted. "Her husband died in a mining accident 3 weeks back. Company threw her out of the housing. Nowhere to go, no family, and a baby to feed." Catherine looked at Eleanor with desperate hope. "Mrs. Hutchins said you might have work. Said you were building something up here where people could start over." Eleanor glanced at Boone, who shrugged. "Your call." "We're not building anything," Eleanor said carefully. "We're just trying to survive like everyone else." Catherine's face fell. "But," Eleanor continued, "we do have room. And we could use help with the garden, the cooking, the general work. Can't pay much besides food and shelter." "That's more than I got now," Catherine said quickly. "I can work hard, won't be any trouble." "The baby?" "He's quiet, good baby, won't disturb anyone." Eleanor looked at Marcus, who nodded slightly, then at Boone. The mountain giant studied Catherine with that assessing gaze, seeing past the desperation to whatever lay beneath. "You run from your problems?" he asked bluntly. "No, sir. I run from things that'll kill me and my son. There's a difference." Boone's expression softened fractionally. "There is indeed. All right. You can stay." Catherine's relief was palpable. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank us yet," Eleanor said. "Winter up here is brutal. You might change your mind." "I won't." They got Catherine and the baby, named Thomas, settled in the spare room. Eleanor dug out blankets and Marcus checked them both over with a physician's thoroughness, declaring them undernourished but otherwise healthy. That night, after Catherine had fallen asleep with exhaustion, Eleanor joined Boone on the porch. "This is how it starts," she said quietly. "How what starts?" "What you were afraid of. People coming here, needing things, depending on us." Boone was silent for a long moment. "Yeah, I know." "You could have said no." "Could have, didn't want to." He looked at her. "You were right that day after the siege. This mountain is yours too now, your home. If you want to share it with people who need shelter, that's your choice to make." "Our choice," Eleanor corrected. "This is your home first." "Then we're agreed. The woman and her baby can stay." He paused. "Dutch said there'll be more. Word spreading about Frost Ridge, about a place where outcasts can go. And you're okay with that?" "I'm terrified of it," Boone admitted. "But I'm also tired of living like the world's going to end if I let anyone in. Didn't work out well the first time I tried it." Eleanor understood. He was talking about after Sarah's death, when he'd buried himself in isolation so deep that Marcus had to trick him into human contact. "We'll figure it out together," she said. "Yeah." Boone's hand found hers in the darkness. Together. By harvest time, Frost Ridge had grown. Catherine proved as hardworking as promised, taking over most of the cooking and tending the garden with fierce dedication. Dutch brought two more refugees, a Chinese railroad worker fleeing persecution and an elderly trapper whose hands had gotten too arthritic for the work. They built a second cabin to house the newcomers, smaller than the lodge but sturdy. Eleanor found herself managing people, settling disputes, making decisions about food distribution and work assignments. It was exhausting and occasionally frustrating, but it was also purposeful in a way she'd never experienced. "You're good at this," Marcus observed one evening as Eleanor sorted through supply requests. "Leadership. I'm making it up as I go. That's what all good leaders do. They just don't admit it." The first snow fell in October, earlier than expected. Eleanor stood on the porch watching fat flakes drift down, remembering her first journey to Frost Ridge. How terrified she'd been, how certain she would die before spring. Boone came up behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Thinking?" he asked. "Remembering. That first trip up the mountain, how I was convinced you'd brought me here to murder me. Did cross my mind a few times, especially when you burned breakfast 3 days in a row." Eleanor elbowed him. "I was learning. You were terrible. And now? Now you only burn breakfast twice a week. Significant improvement." She turned to face him. "Seriously, what do you think? About all of this? The people? The changes?" Boone considered the question. "I think I spent 6 years building walls to keep grief out. Didn't work. Walls just kept everything out, including the good things." He touched her face gently. "Then you showed up and knocked a hole in every wall I had. Can't say I'm entirely comfortable with it, but I'm alive again. That's worth some discomfort." "Just some?" "All right, considerable discomfort. You're very disruptive." Eleanor smiled. "Good." She kissed him then, standing on the porch while snow fell around them. It wasn't their first kiss. That had happened 2 months ago during a thunderstorm, hasty and awkward and perfect. But this one felt different, less urgent, more certain. When they pulled apart, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably make the marriage thing official," he said. "Properly, not just for show." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of fact. We're already married in every way that matters. Just missing the ceremony." "That might be the least romantic proposal in history." "Want me to get down on one knee? Because my leg's still stiff from where I got shot saving your life." "You did not save my life. I saved yours." "Debatable." Eleanor laughed, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "Yes, you impossible man. Let's make it official." "Good. Because I already asked Dutch to bring a preacher next trip." "You were that confident I'd say yes?" "I was that confident you're too stubborn to leave even if you wanted to." Boone kissed her again, softer this time. "Besides, someone needs to keep you from burning down my kitchen." Our kitchen, he agreed. They stood together watching snow transform the mountain into something clean and new. Inside, Eleanor could hear Catherine singing to her baby, smell bread baking, hear Marcus arguing with the elderly trapper about medical treatments. This was home now, not the lodge or the mountain or the endless sky, but these people, this purpose, this stubborn refusal to let the world break them. Eleanor had crossed the entire country looking for somewhere she belonged. Turns out she'd had to build it herself. The preacher arrived 3 weeks later with Dutch, looking pale and miserable from the climb. "Never again," he gasped, sliding off his horse like a sack of grain. "I don't care how much you pay me. I'm not coming back to this mountain." "That's fine," Boone said, catching the man before he collapsed. "We only need you once." The ceremony happened the next morning in the clearing in front of the lodge. The entire population of Frost Ridge gathered, all 9 of them now, counting the baby. Catherine had sewn Eleanor a dress from fabric Dutch had brought, simple but clean. Boone wore his least worn shirt and actually combed his beard. Marcus stood as witness, grinning like he'd personally arranged the whole thing. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, about weathering storms together. Eleanor barely heard the words. She was too focused on Boone's hands holding hers, steady and warm, on his eyes watching her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "Do you, Garrick Boone, take this woman?" "I do," Boone interrupted. The preacher blinked. "I haven't finished the question." "Don't need to. Answer's yes." "And do you, Eleanor Vale?" "Yes," Eleanor said quickly. Whatever he said, yes. The preacher looked between them, somewhere between amused and exasperated. "Well then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may—" Boone kissed her before he could finish. The small crowd cheered. Catherine wiped tears from her eyes. The elderly trapper, whose name was Samuel, fired his rifle into the air in celebration until Marcus wrestled it away from him. "You're married now," the preacher said once order was restored. "Legally bound before the law." "We were bound before you showed up," Boone said. "This just makes it official." Eleanor laughed, happiness bright and unexpected in her chest. A year ago, she'd been standing in Black Hollow being rejected by an entire town. Now she was married to a man who'd chosen her first, surrounded by people who'd followed their example and chosen themselves over what the world expected. That night, they celebrated with a feast Catherine and Eleanor had spent 2 days preparing. Venison, roasted potatoes, bread that was only slightly burned. Dutch had brought whiskey that tasted like turpentine but burned pleasantly going down. "To the happy couple," Dutch said, raising his glass. "May they have many years of bickering and occasional happiness." "Hear, hear," Marcus added. "I'm not sure that's a traditional toast," Eleanor said. "Nothing about this situation is traditional," Dutch pointed out. "Might as well embrace it." They drank and ate and told stories as the fire crackled. Catherine sang songs from her childhood in Pennsylvania. Samuel demonstrated how he'd once arm wrestled a grizzly bear and won, a story that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Even the Chinese railroad worker, whose English was limited but improving, shared a tale about working in the mountains that involved a ghost and a stolen lunch pail. Eleanor looked around the room and felt something settle in her chest. These weren't the people she'd imagined building a life with. They were better. Real, flawed, stubborn survivors who refused to quit even when the world gave them every reason to. Boone's hand found hers under the table, squeezed once. She squeezed back. Later, after everyone had stumbled off to their beds drunk and happy, Eleanor and Boone sat alone by the dying fire. "You tired?" Boone asked. "Exhausted, happy, both. Good combination." He stared into the embers. "I never thought I'd do this again. Get married. Let people in. Build something worth protecting. Having regrets already?" "Not even one." He turned to look at her. "You changed everything, Eleanor. Made me remember that surviving isn't the same as living." "You did the same for me," Eleanor said quietly. "Saw something in me nobody else bothered to look for. Made me believe I could be more than what people expected. You were always more. You just needed the chance to prove it." They sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned down to ash and the lodge grew cold. Then Boone stood, offered his hand, and led Eleanor upstairs to start the next chapter of their life together. Winter that year was brutal. Snow fell in quantities Eleanor had never seen, burying the smaller cabin up to its windows. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being brought inside. They burned through firewood at an alarming rate, forcing everyone to take shifts chopping more despite the cold that made axes bounce off frozen logs like they were stone. The Chinese worker, who'd asked to be called James because his real name was too difficult for the others to pronounce, showed them how to build snow barriers that protected the buildings from wind. Catherine rationed food with a discipline that kept them from running short even when a blizzard trapped them inside for 8 days straight. Eleanor discovered she was pregnant in January. She'd suspected for weeks but had been afraid to hope. Marcus confirmed it with his usual clinical efficiency, then broke into a grin that transformed his normally serious face. "Congratulations," he said. "You're approximately 3 months along. Due sometime in late summer, if my calculations are correct." Eleanor sat on the examination table in Marcus's makeshift clinic, trying to process the information. A baby. She was going to have a baby. "Does Garrick know?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told him." "He'll be terrified," Marcus said bluntly. "After Sarah, the thought of going through that again will scare him worse than any grizzly." "I know." Eleanor touched her still flat stomach. "But I'm not Sarah, and this isn't the same situation. You'll need to remind him of that, probably multiple times." Eleanor told Boone that night after everyone else had gone to bed. She'd planned a gentle approach, a careful way to ease him into the news. Instead, she just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Boone froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak, barely seemed to breathe. "Boone, say something." The cup hit the table hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. "How far along?" "Marcus thinks 3 months." "And you're healthy? Everything's normal?" "As far as we can tell. Marcus wants to examine me monthly, just to be safe." Boone stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered darkness. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Eleanor's heart sank. "If you don't want this, don't." His voice was rough. "Don't finish that sentence." He turned, and Eleanor saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Raw, naked fear. "I want this," he said. "Want you, want a child, want a future. But Eleanor, I can't lose you. Can't go through that again. It'll kill me." Eleanor crossed the room and took his hands, forcing him to look at her. "You won't lose me. I'm strong, healthy, and we have Marcus, who's a damn good doctor. This isn't the same as Sarah." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to stay alive. And you can promise to trust me to do it." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" Boone pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like she might disappear if he let go. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." They stood together in the firelight, holding each other against the fear and hope and uncertainty of what was coming. Spring brought both relief and new challenges. The snow melted, revealing winter's damage, a collapsed section of fence, 2 trees down across the trail, and the smaller cabin's roof sagging under weight it had barely survived. They spent weeks repairing everything, Eleanor working until Boone physically carried her away from tasks he deemed too strenuous. "I'm pregnant, not broken," she protested after he stopped her from hauling lumber. "You're pregnant and stubborn. Bad combination." "You married me for the stubborn part." Among other things, he deposited her on the porch. "Now sit here and supervise. Tell me if I'm doing it wrong." "You're doing it wrong." "I haven't started yet. Just getting ahead of schedule." More people arrived as the weather improved. A widow with 3 children, 2 brothers fleeing a family feud, a former slave who'd walked from Kansas looking for somewhere he could own land without someone questioning his right to it. Each arrival stretched their resources thinner, but Eleanor refused to turn anyone away. "We're going to need more cabins," she said one evening, studying the crowded settlement. "More gardens. A proper schoolhouse for the children. That takes money," Boone pointed out. "Then we find money." Eleanor touched her growing belly. She was showing now, impossible to hide. "These people came here because they heard Frost Ridge was different, a place where your past didn't matter, only what you were willing to work for. We need to deliver on that promise. And if we can't, we will. We have to." The solution came from an unexpected source. James approached them one morning with a proposal. He'd been surveying the mountain during his work shifts and believed he'd found the silver deposits Mercer had been after, a significant vein running through the eastern ridge. "We mine it carefully," James explained through his improving English. "Take only what we need. Use the money to build, to buy supplies, to make this place sustainable." "Mining's dangerous," Boone said. "People die." "People die anyway. At least this way they die building something." Eleanor looked at Boone. "He's right. We can't keep growing on good intentions alone." "I know." Boone ran a hand through his hair. "Doesn't mean I have to like it." They established the mine with strict safety rules and rotating shifts, so no one worked underground too long. James supervised the operation with careful precision, teaching others his techniques. The silver they extracted was modest but steady, enough to buy lumber and tools and livestock. Frost Ridge transformed. By midsummer, 3 new cabins stood in the clearing. A schoolhouse was under construction, with Catherine volunteering to teach since she'd had some education back east. Fences marked out larger garden plots. Someone had even started a small smithy in a shed behind the original cabin. Eleanor watched it all with pride and exhaustion. Her pregnancy was progressing normally according to Marcus, but she was tired constantly, her body working overtime to build a new life while she tried to build a community. "You need to rest more," Marcus said during one of his examinations. "I rest plenty. Sitting down for 5 minutes while planning the next project doesn't count as rest. I'll rest when the baby comes." "That's when you'll rest least," Marcus said dryly. "Take it from someone who's delivered 17 babies. None of the mothers got any sleep for the first 6 months. Eleanor knew he was right, but she couldn't stop. There was too much to do, too many people depending on her. The settlement needed leadership, and Boone refused to take that role. He was content to be the muscle, the protection, the one people feared enough to respect Frost Ridge's boundaries. So Eleanor stepped up. She mediated disputes between neighbors, organized work schedules, made decisions about resource allocation, listened to people's problems, and tried to find solutions that worked for everyone. It was exhausting. It was also exactly what she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it, purpose that went beyond simple survival. One evening in late July, Eleanor was walking the settlement perimeter when she heard shouting. She followed the sound to find two men squared off outside the smithy. The former slave, Marcus had been calling him Samuel, though Eleanor knew that wasn't his real name, and one of the brothers who'd arrived in April. "Say that again," Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I said maybe you should stick to the work you know." The brother, his name was Curtis, sneered. "Leave the skilled labor to people who understand it." "I understand it just fine, probably better than you." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Eleanor stepped between them before fists could fly. "What's going on here?" "He's questioning my ability to work iron," Samuel said, not taking his eyes off Curtis, "because of the color of my skin." "I didn't say that," Curtis protested. "You didn't have to." Eleanor looked at Curtis. "Is that true? You got a problem with Samuel's work?" "I got a problem with someone thinking they can do what my family's been doing for 3 generations just because they read a book about it." "Your family been doing it for 3 generations," Eleanor said slowly. "But you ain't been here 3 months. Samuel's been here since spring, working harder than anyone. So unless you got specific complaints about his work, actual problems, not opinions, you can keep your mouth shut." Curtis's face flushed. "This ain't right. You're taking his side because—" "I'm taking the side of someone who's proved himself," Eleanor interrupted. "You want to prove yourself, you do it through work, not talk. Otherwise you can pack up and leave. We don't have room here for people who judge others based on anything except their effort." "You can't kick me out. I got nowhere else to go." "Then adjust your attitude." Eleanor's voice went hard. "Real fast, because the first rule of Frost Ridge is simple. We don't care where you came from, or what you look like, or what mistakes you made before you got here. We only care about who you are now and what you're willing to contribute. You understand me?" Curtis stared at her, jaw working. Finally, he nodded. "Good. Now apologize to Samuel and get back to work." The apology was grudging, but it came. Curtis stalked off, leaving Eleanor alone with Samuel. "Thank you," Samuel said quietly. "Most places, that would have gone different. Most places aren't Frost Ridge." Eleanor touched her aching back. "We're trying to build something better here. Don't always succeed, but we keep trying." "That's more than most can say." Eleanor nodded and continued her walk, thinking about what she'd just said. Something better. That's what all of this was supposed to be. A place where the rules were different, where people got second chances, where worth was measured by work instead of birth. It was a nice idea. Making it reality was harder than she'd expected. Labor started on a Tuesday in late August, 3 weeks earlier than Marcus had predicted. Eleanor was in the garden when the first contraction hit, strong enough to drive her to her knees. Catherine found her there, gripping the fence post and breathing hard. "Get Marcus!" Eleanor gasped. "And Boone!" Catherine ran. The next hours blurred together in waves of pain that came faster and harder than Eleanor had imagined possible. Marcus worked with calm efficiency while Boone paced the room like a caged animal, his face gray with barely controlled panic. "You need to leave," Marcus said after Boone knocked over a tray of medical instruments for the 3rd time. "Like hell." "Garrick, you're making this harder. Wait outside." "I'm not leaving her." Eleanor grabbed his hand during a contraction, squeezing hard enough that Boone winced. "Stay," she managed. "Need you here." So he stayed, holding her hand and trying not to look at the blood and doing a terrible job of hiding his terror. Catherine assisted Marcus, bringing water and clean cloths and murmuring encouragement that Eleanor barely heard over her own screaming. The baby came as the sun set, sliding into the world with an angry cry that was the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. "It's a girl," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. He cleaned her quickly and placed her on Eleanor's chest. "A healthy girl." Eleanor looked down at the tiny, furious face and felt something shift in her chest. This was her daughter. Hers and Boone's. A new life they'd created together in this impossible place. "She's perfect," Eleanor whispered. Boone made a sound that might have been a sob. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one massive finger, and she grabbed on with surprising strength. "She's strong," he said hoarsely, "like her mother." "She'll need to be," Eleanor said, "growing up on this mountain." They named her Sarah Catherine Boone. Sarah for the woman who'd come before, Catherine for the woman who'd helped bring her into the world. Young Sarah had her father's pale eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. Within a week, Eleanor knew this child would be a force to reckon with. Frost Ridge welcomed her with the same practical warmth they showed everything else. The women took turns helping Eleanor so she could rest. The men built a crib that was probably sturdy enough to survive a bear attack. Everyone brought small gifts, carved toys, knitted blankets, a silver rattle made from the first ore James had pulled from the mine. "She's going to be spoiled rotten," Eleanor said one evening, watching Boone rock their daughter to sleep with surprising gentleness. "Good," Boone said. "She should know she's wanted, valued, that she belongs here." "She will. All of them will." Eleanor gestured at the settlement visible through the window, lights glowing in the various cabins. "That's what we're building, right? A place where everyone belongs." "Ambitious." "We've done harder things." Boone looked at her, his expression soft. "Yeah, we have." 2 years later, Frost Ridge had grown into something neither of them had imagined. The settlement now housed 43 people counting children. The mine produced steady income. The school taught reading and arithmetic and survival skills. They'd established a trading route with 3 other mountain communities and Black Hollow, though Eleanor still refused to visit that particular town. Young Sarah was walking and talking and getting into everything. She'd inherited her father's fearlessness and her mother's determination, a combination that gave both parents gray hair. "She's going to be the death of me," Boone said one afternoon after extracting Sarah from the horse pen for the 5th time that week. "She's 2, Eleanor said. "Imagine what she'll be like at 10. "I'd rather not," but he was smiling when he said it. Eleanor stood on the porch watching people move through the settlement, working, talking, living. The widow's children played with Catherine's son in the schoolyard. James supervised new miners with patient expertise. Samuel's smithy rang with the sound of hammer on anvil. This was what they'd built. Not just buildings and businesses, but community, family, a place where the rejected and forgotten could start over. Dutch rode up with his usual supply delivery, looking older but still tough as leather. "Got mail," he announced, swinging down from his horse. "Official looking, too." Eleanor took the envelope with curiosity. It was addressed to Garrick and Eleanor Boone, Frost Ridge Settlement, Colorado Territory. Inside was a letter from the territorial governor. She read it twice, not quite believing the words. "What is it?" Boone asked, emerging from the lodge with Sarah on his shoulders. They're recognizing us. Officially." Eleanor looked up from the letter. "Frost Ridge is now a legal township. We can elect our own mayor, establish our own laws, claim mineral rights to the entire mountain." "That's because of the taxes you've been paying," Dutch said. "Government doesn't care about much, but it cares about money flowing into Denver." "So we're legitimate," Boone said slowly. "Not just squatters anymore." "Not just squatters," Eleanor agreed. "We're real." That night they gathered everyone in the schoolhouse, the largest building they had, and shared the news. The response was overwhelming. People cried, laughed, embraced each other. They'd all come to Frost Ridge as refugees, outcasts, people with nowhere else to go. Now they had legal protection, recognition, a future. "We need to elect a mayor," Catherine said. "That's what the letter said, right?" "It did," Eleanor confirmed. "Then I nominate Eleanor Boone," Catherine continued. "All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up. Eleanor stared at them, overwhelmed. "I can't. There must be someone more qualified." "There isn't," Marcus said. "You've been leading this place since it started. Might as well make it official." "All those in favor of Eleanor Boone as mayor of Frost Ridge," Boone said, his voice carrying across the room. "Say aye." The chorus of ayes was deafening. Eleanor found herself blinking back tears for the second time that day. These people, her people, trusted her to lead them, wanted her to lead them. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman everyone needed. "All right," she said when she could speak again. "I accept, but I'm going to need help. A council, maybe. People who can handle different aspects of running this place." They spent the next hour organizing. Marcus would handle medical affairs and education. James would oversee the mine. Samuel would manage the crafts and trade. Catherine would continue running the school, but also help with community organization. Boone refused any official title. "I'm better as the scary giant who backs up Eleanor's decisions," he said when pressed. "Let me do what I'm good at." "Intimidation?" Marcus suggested. "Exactly." The meeting broke up near midnight, everyone exhausted but energized. Eleanor walked back to the lodge with Boone, Sarah asleep in his arms. "You ready for this?" Boone asked. "Being mayor? I've been doing it unofficially for 2 years. Might as well have the title." Eleanor looked back at the settlement, lights still burning in several cabins. "We did this, Boone. Built something from nothing." "You did this, he corrected. "I just made sure nobody tried to stop you." "We did this," Eleanor insisted. "Together." Inside the lodge, they put Sarah to bed and sat by the fire. Eleanor's mind was already racing with plans, things they needed to build, problems they needed to solve, ways to make Frost Ridge even better. "What are you thinking?" Boone asked. "That we need a proper clinic for Marcus, and maybe a church, though we'd need to find a preacher willing to climb up here permanently. And the eastern cabins need better insulation before winter." "Cheat." Boone kissed her, cutting off the list. "What was that for?" Eleanor asked when he pulled back. "You were starting to sound stressed. Thought I'd distract you." It worked. They sat in comfortable silence, Boone's arm around Eleanor's shoulders. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "I never thanked you," Eleanor said quietly. "For what?" "For choosing me in Black Hollow. For seeing something in me worth saving." Boone shifted to look at her directly. "I didn't save you, Eleanor. You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." "We saved each other then." "Yeah, I think we did." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, thinking about how far they'd both come. The mountain giant who'd buried himself in grief and isolation. The rejected bride who'd believed she was worthless. Together they'd built an empire. Not an empire of wealth or power, though they had some of both now, but an empire of second chances, of people who'd been told they didn't matter, proving the world wrong. Young Sarah cried from her room, and Eleanor rose to tend to her. As she lifted her daughter and felt small arms wrap around her neck, Eleanor understood something fundamental. This was the whole point of everything she'd been through, every rejection, every hardship, every moment of pain and fear, all of it had led here. To this mountain, to this family, to this purpose. She'd spent her whole life being told she wasn't enough. Now she knew the truth. She'd always been enough. She just needed the right place to prove it. Years later, travelers passing through the Colorado mountains would tell stories about Frost Ridge, about the settlement that appeared out of nowhere, where outcasts became leaders and the impossible became routine, about the woman mayor who'd been rejected by an entire town and turned that rejection into fuel for building something better, about the mountain giant who'd learned to trust again, and the community that grew from that trust. Some said it was too good to be true. Those people had never met Eleanor Boone. She would have told them that nothing about Frost Ridge was easy or perfect, that they struggled every winter, that people still had conflicts and problems and fears, that building something worth having was hard, exhausting work that never really ended. But she would also tell them it was worth it. Every backbreaking day, every impossible problem, every moment of doubt, worth it, because they'd created a place where worth wasn't determined by appearance or birth or past mistakes, where effort mattered more than origin, where everyone got to decide who they wanted to be instead of accepting who the world said they were. That was the real empire they'd built, and it would outlast them all.